The $1.5 trillion efficiency. Lie. Why your city is a trap. That ceiling stain looked like a tiny smudge at first, didn't it? By the third week, it started spreading across the drywall like a nasty bruise, and the contractor just smiled while quoting you 4 figures to open it up and take a look. Your car insurance went up again for no reason, the office moved everyone to those miserable hot desks, and the grocery store somehow charged you $80 for 3 measly bags of food. Here's the kicker. None of this is actually an accident because it's a system that specifically needs you to be tired and broke. There is currently $1.5 trillion riding on the fact that you live inside boxes designed to break on a schedule. We are going to name the players, show exactly how they coordinate their moves, and I will show you where the exits are. Meet the gray box. Get this, your entire life is currently threaded through a never-ending chain of depressing gray boxes. You sleep in a drywall box, you drive around in a car-sized metal box, and you spend your days in a glass and steel box under lights that never stop humming. Even the big box store is a trap where the milk is never, ever located near the front door. Each one of these spaces tries to sell you on the idea of efficiency. But the truth is that every single one of them hides a ticking timer. So who exactly is building this maze we're all stuck in? You have developers who prioritize speed over a building's actual lifespan, and REITs that package apartment buildings like they're just financial products on a shelf. Materials giants fill their catalogs with cheap, standard parts, while big box retailers push those same parts using secret rebates and flashy end-cap displays. Behind all of it sits the finance industry, cycling massive amounts of debt through properties that look modern on day 1 but start shedding parts by year 5. It is a massive flywheel of standard plans, preferred vendors, predictable draws, and fast closings that just repeats forever. To understand why efficient actually became a total trap, we need to go back to the 1940s and 1950s. Post-war America was desperate for homes that were fast and cheap, so standardization was treated like a miracle cure for the housing crisis. Builders started using drywall instead of traditional plaster and OSB instead of solid wood boards, while staple guns replaced the need for careful joinery. These just-in-time parts cut costs significantly, and building codes spread everywhere because you could finally build at a massive scale without needing any bespoke skills. It wasn't all bad since it actually put roofs over families, but the real profit didn't come from building homes that lasted for generations. The money came from volume and speed, and later on, it came from the endless cycle of replacement. This is where the whole situation gets really sticky for the average homeowner. Rebates and co-op advertising are used to quietly pick winners in the construction industry before you even hire a contractor. If a builder agrees to use a preferred insulation or a specific brand of fastener, the vendor writes a check back to the builder or the retailer. Warranties are also designed to split parts from labor, which means the manufacturer might stand behind a broken widget, but you still have to pay an installer to fix it. Failure isn't some rare mistake in the system. It is actually baked into assemblies that absolutely hate moisture, movement, and natural sunlight. You won't see any of that in the glossy sales brochure, where they just promise a lifetime finish with a tiny little asterisk next to it. Meanwhile, the lenders and appraisers are busy demanding that every building looks like a standard, predictable product. Conforming loans really love predictable boxes, so if your design uses a material that isn't on a big box shelf, the money people start getting very nervous. Builders are forced to color inside the lines because the supply chains reward them for being boring and predictable. Cities are constantly pressed for tax revenue, so they approve whatever project pencils out the fastest on a spreadsheet. The result is a landscape of total gray with the same cladding, the same hollow doors, and the same HVAC systems with the fresh air dialed down to save a buck. New things always look good at first, but new in this system is usually paper thin. You might be surprised to learn how the math actually stacks up when you look at the big picture. There is roughly $1.5 trillion in commercial real estate debt rolling through this machine right now. Every time a building needs to be refinanced, the owners have to tell a story about stable tenants and modern upgrades to keep the banks happy. That usually means a cycle of stripping, swapping, repainting, and relighting everything in sight. They install new LED panels with drivers that flicker just enough to give you a headache and new vinyl floors that scuff after just 2 winters. Maintenance has basically become a form of marketing because if the building looks fresh, the spreadsheet makes everyone smile. And the same exact churn is hitting you at home, too. House flips are just lipstick on a pig with shaker doors, gray paint, and quartz look-alike countertops. Underneath all that, you'll find paper-faced gypsum that swells up the second a supply line starts to sweat. OSB puffs up if a window leaks even a tiny bit, and the adhesives are so aggressive that you can't even do a simple spot fix. This is why updates never seem to end, and it isn't because you're bad at adulting. The system was literally designed to force you into a whole room redo, instead of a simple patch and carry on. While all of that was happening inside the real estate market, the street outside was baking in a second trap. Single-use zoning carved our lives into separate little buckets. You live here, you work there, and you buy groceries somewhere else entirely. It sounds tidy on paper, but it really just sells traffic models that prove we need more lanes. And who actually benefits from that? The makers of cars, asphalt, tires, and fuel, along with the big boxes that need giant parking lots to survive. Car dependency turns into a monthly subscription for fuel, insurance, tires, and tabs that cost you $20,000 a year. Inside the big box stores, the psychology is dialed in to make you spend more than you planned. Essentials like milk live in the very back of the store, so you have to trek past 15 different traps to get there. End caps are sold like real estate. Scent pumps waft vanilla near the fresh bakery, and misers gloss the vegetables so they look crisp. Self-checkouts shift all the labor onto you, and then shrink gets blamed to justify price hikes and fewer staff members. It is efficiency for the corporation and nothing but friction for you. Back at the office, collaboration was the big pitch for tearing down all the walls. What actually happened was that face-to-face talks dropped while Slack pings exploded into a constant distraction. Blue-heavy LEDs messed with everyone's sleep, and recirculated air made our heads feel dull by lunch. Desk hoteling meant you had no home base, which sounds nimble until every single day starts with a scavenger hunt for a place to sit. That low-grade stress is actually the point, because it keeps you moving, buying, and managing. Now, I'm not saying there is a smoke-filled room where 5 guys are plotting your Tuesday afternoon. It is much looser than that, with trade groups writing model codes that only the big vendors can afford to pass. Retailers dangle rebates to steer choices, appraisers and banks normalize the look of everything, and cities chase short-term fees. Everyone is just following the incentives, and those incentives reward a disposable life. Okay, let's open up the walls, literally. The Sheetrock scam. Homes built to fail. Go ahead and pop off a baseboard or pull a light switch cover to peek inside your wall. What you're going to see in almost every new build is paper-faced gypsum screwed to wooden studs, a quick skim of joint compound at the seams, and some latex paint slapped over the top. On the outside, there's usually OSB sheathing hiding behind the siding. It's a system built for speed and lightweight, but it's fragile in all the boring ways that end up costing you a fortune down the road. Gypsum absolutely hates liquid water. The paper face is basically a gourmet buffet for mold. And OSB swells up like a sponge the second a window leaks or a pipe starts to sweat. None of this is a rare defect. It's actually the industry standard. The stakes here are higher than you might think. A tiny pinhole leak in a supply line or a cold snap that drives moisture into your wall cavities can trigger massive repair bills. Because this whole assembly wasn't designed to be fixed in small pieces, you can't just patch a little blister when the paper face starts to bubble. You have to cut out giant sections, reskim entire planes of the wall, and repaint the whole room just to hide the difference in the paint sheen. One single failure point quickly turns into a weekend full of white dust, $1,000 in labor, and another depressing trip to the big box hardware store. Let's look at how this actually plays out when winter hits and your indoor air stays warm and wet from showers or cooking. In a tight modern house with weak ventilation, that water vapor desperately tries to move toward cold surfaces until it eventually hits the exterior sheathing. If that sheathing is made of OSB, the wood strands wick up the moisture and expand, which loosens the nails just enough to let the drywall chill and cause condensation to dot behind your paint. You won't even see it happening at first, but a month later, a nasty yellow crescent blooms near your baseboard. Your contractor will probably just shrug and tell you that he needs to open up the wall to see the damage. He isn't wrong about the fix, but you should notice how the expensive machine is starting up. You're paying for demo, dump fees, new board, tape, primer, paint, and trim. Then maybe you'll get the real fix like better vents or flashing, unless someone decides it's good enough and just resets the timer for the next failure. The real impact is that you get locked onto a permanent remodel treadmill. It's not because you're being picky or want a new look. It's because the building system itself forces a total redo every time something small goes wrong. Modern adhesives bond trim so tightly to the wall that you'll probably break the wood just trying to remove it. Paint sheens almost never match on a patch job, and modern flooring clicks together in a way that means a dent in the middle of the room requires you to disassemble half the floor. Materials are chosen because they are fast to install, not because they are easy to service or maintain. If your walls were made of lime plaster on lath, you could just dig out a crack, wash it, push in some new plaster, and move on with your life. With drywall, the paper just tears and spreads the damage. And with OSB, a tiny wet spot turns into a lumpy corner that will never lie flat again. I heard a story about a couple who bought a fresh, flipped house with a new vanity, porch-look counters, and that classic tasteful gray paint. By week 6, their kid accidentally knocked a glass of water off the sink, and the liquid ran right behind the backsplash where nobody could see it. By week 8, the seam under the mirror started to puff up, and when they tried to caulk it, the paint wrinkled and the paper face lifted right off the board. They called the flipper to complain, but he just reminded them that the warranty only covered 1 year of labor and lifetime on the parts. But what parts are we talking about? A new $10 sheet of gypsum. The manufacturer will happily stand behind the board itself, but the labor to tear out the bathroom and reinstall everything is entirely on the homeowner. They ended up spending $900 to fix a bubble the size of a palm. And since the factory-mixed paint had faded slightly, they had to repaint the entire room. That is the definition of the treadmill. Meanwhile, big rebates and co-op marketing are the ones actually steering the menu for what gets built. Builders often get kickback checks for using a specific brand of house wrap, a certain caulk, or a specific line of shiny fixtures. Authorized installer programs act like gatekeepers for who is even allowed to touch certain systems in your home. Warranties are split into tiny pieces. The membrane might be covered, but only if the fasteners were installed with the exact right cap heads and spacing. You also have to use their specific match tape and have a factory rep sign off on the whole thing. This means you aren't actually shopping for the best long-term option for your family. You're just assembling a proprietary sandwich because the system pays the builder back in the short term. What nobody bothers to tell you is that the lifetime of drywall is mostly just a marketing word. In the real world, the service life of your walls depends on humidity swings, accidental impacts, and whether or not the materials can actually dry out. Normal life, things like kids, pets, showers, and cooking, constantly shortens that lifespan. Compare that to those beautiful old houses with lime plaster that have survived for over a century. They last because plaster can be patched easily, it breathes naturally, and it isn't a delicious meal for mold spores. I'm not saying we all need to live in a museum, but we definitely traded repairability for installation speed, and now we pay the price for that every 10 years. And don't even get me started on flips, because those are built to look good in a photograph, not to actually endure a human being living in them. Shaker doors often hide cheap stapled boxes, and vinyl plank flooring is stretched over bouncy subfloors where it eventually cups the second a dishwasher leaks. Tile is often set over backer board using mastic instead of real mortar just to save a single day of labor, which means it fails the moment a hairline crack appears in the floor. You can't even swap out one broken tile cleanly because the mastic will rip the board behind it, and suddenly you're recutting half the wall. Every single update just ties you tighter to materials that simply do not forgive mistakes. Let's look at the stakes again, because this isn't just about your bank account. It's about the time you'll never get back and the feeling of learned helplessness when you stare at a stain you can't fix without making a giant mess. It's about indoor air that smells a little bit off after every rain because the paper inside your walls is holding onto mold spores. It's just another excuse to swipe your credit card at the big box store while you try to convince yourself that you're investing in your home. So who is actually profiting from this cycle? It's the manufacturers who sell more units, the retailers who move massive volume, and the installers who get repeat calls every time a wall bubbles. Even the finance industry loves a house that needs constant refreshes right before a homeowner decides to refinance. As for you, you just get a fresh coat of paint over a very fragile foundation, and when it inevitably fails on schedule, the maze opens up to lead you right back to the next aisle. Cartel, zoning that sells your time. The second you step outside your front door, the rules change, but the trap stays exactly the same. Single-use zoning has sliced your entire day into a series of errands that you can't possibly combine. Your home is in one spot, your job is way over there, the groceries are in a different direction, and the school is across a 6-lane road that feels more like a castle moat than a road. It might look safe and organized on a map because there are no nuisances near the houses, but it effectively kills any chance of living a life within a short walk. Once that layout is coded into the city maps, everything else like the roads, the pipes, and the parking follows along with a massive bill. Here are the stakes for your daily life. When stores and workplaces aren't allowed to be near homes, every single routine task becomes a mandatory car trip. That turns transportation into a forced subscription whether you actually like driving or not. Did you know that the average cost to own and operate a car is now floating around $10,000 every single year? When you add up fuel, insurance, tires, registration, and depreciation, plus the interest if you finance the thing, the numbers are staggering. If you have to add a second car because zoning scattered your life across the county, you've quietly signed a $20,000 contract that renews every single January. Let's look at the action first. A town usually draws its entire future on a colorful zoning map with yellow for houses, red for retail, and blue for offices. These lines look very tidy to a planner, so the traffic modeler plugs those numbers into a computer. By default, the model assumes every single person will drive because there isn't actually anything else to do across those massive distances. Then the model proves that the road is going to fail without more lanes, so the city widens a street into a strode that is too slow to be a highway but too fast to be a safe street. Now the area is totally hostile to walking, so even the tiny short trips flip into car trips, which adds more cars to the count and justifies even more lanes next time. This is exactly how induced demand gets buried at the very start of the process and then used to sell you the expensive fix. Meanwhile, cul-de-sacs start sprouting up like mushrooms in every new development. They might feel quiet and private, but they actually dump every single car onto just a few big collector roads. This is why every school drop-off piles into the exact same bottlenecks every morning. The distance, as the crow flies, might only be 3 blocks, but the legal driving path is 1.5 miles around a maze of fences and berms. Because those collector roads get lined with driveways and turning cars, the highway engineers start asking for turn lanes, medians, and the removal of crosswalks to improve flow. But you have to ask yourself, what exactly are they flowing? Usually, it's just your precious hours. Developers are just following the incentives they've been given. Greenfield sprawl makes financial sense because raw land is cheap, the building codes are familiar, and parking minimums are easy to meet in the middle of a cornfield. Trying to build an infill project with mixed-use shops and apartments is a total knife fight involving variances, angry neighbors, and banks that hate financing anything mixed. Pro formas almost always pick the path of least resistance. They build giant boxes surrounded by moats of asphalt because the rules demand it and the lenders reward it, while cities hungry for permit fees just wave the whole thing through. Municipal finance is where the situation really twists the knife. Parking minimums force developers to overspend on concrete spaces that sit empty for most of the year. Every new mile of lane and every new sewer branch looks like growth today, but the maintenance costs arrive 20 years later like a massive credit card bill. This is that growth Ponzi pattern where cities extend further out to get quick cash up front, but they inherit long-term costs that the taxes from low-value sprawl can never actually cover. The per-acre tax revenue of a small mixed-use block absolutely beats a big-box store with an ocean of parking, but city budgets rarely compare the two that way. Instead, cities choose the project that looks big and impressive, rather than the one that actually pays for itself. From where you're sitting, the Commute cartel shows up as constant daily friction. You spend your life driving on stroads that invite you to go 45 miles per hour, but post a limit of 35. You have to slam on your brakes at every single driveway, and you spend your afternoons inching through double left turn lanes. You might have to cross 12 feet of painted nothing just to reach a bus stop that doesn't even have a bench. The bus is probably only running once an hour because the land use doesn't support enough riders to make it frequent. Since the routes are long and indirect, you decide to drive just this once. And eventually, that just this once becomes your entire life. Inside the world of local politics, industry money keeps these maps locked tight. Auto and oil trade groups frequently fund traffic safety campaigns that somehow always end up arguing for more highway lanes. State departments of transportation cling to volume targets that were baked into manuals decades ago. Local chambers of commerce mostly hear from big box retailers who need giant lots and easy truck turns, rather than the corner grocer who doesn't even exist because zoning banned him. Whenever someone proposes allowing apartments over shops or a small corner store, the fear-mongering mailers show up in your mailbox. They talk about parking doom and show crime graphs out of context, usually featuring a photo of a high-rise that is nowhere near your actual block. I remember a story about a school nurse in a suburb who tried to walk her kid to daycare and then catch the bus to work. It was only 8 minutes away as the crow flies, but it took 28 minutes in real life because there was no legal way to cross the road without walking to a light half a mile away. She tried it exactly once before a pickup truck honked at her while she was edging along a painted stripe with a stroller. She bought a second car a month later, which cost her another 10 grand a year plus 3,000 in interest because rates had jumped. The daycare is still only 2 blocks away from her house, but she'll never walk there again. The impact of this time tax eventually rolls right into your physical health. You're doing more sitting, feeling more stress from near misses in parking lots, and burning more money on things you don't even enjoy. For the cities, the maintenance cliff is getting closer every day as the pipes under those stroads fail and the asphalt needs expensive milling. Police have to write more tickets just to manage the speeding that was literally designed into the road's width. Transit stays stagnant because it can't win trips against such a dispersed lifestyle. For the developers and the lenders, sprawl stays the safe bet because it's a standard product with standard comps and easy exits. You might be surprised to learn that the escape from this isn't some kind of magic trick. When city codes finally allow for missing middle housing and small commercial shops on the corners, those short trips start to come back. When a city decides to trim its parking minimums, the cost to build anything drops and a walkable form can finally return to the neighborhood. When stroads are converted back into actual streets with narrowed lanes, frequent crossings, and shade trees, crashes and injuries fall while retail sales usually go up. The cartel doesn't just vanish overnight, but its math starts to wobble the second you stop feeding it with forced miles. The retail maze, friction that prints money. Next time you walk into a big box store, pay close attention to where your feet want to go. Most people naturally turn right, so retailers pack that power perimeter with the good stuff, produce the bakery and the deli. It's all bright colors and amazing smells because, let's be honest, we all buy way more food when we're feeling hungry and surrounded by fresh vibes. If you're looking for the basics like milk and eggs, you'll find them buried in the far back corner. This forces you to take a full lap past the aisles where the real money is made, the end caps. Those displays at the end of the aisles aren't just for decoration. They are high-priced real estate that vendors bid on because they know we'll grab whatever is right in front of us. This isn't just a quirk of your local shop, as major chains roll out this exact same maze across thousands of locations to boost the size of every single basket. Your time and your attention are the actual currency here, and choice overload is the weapon they use to wear you down. When you're staring at 60 different cereal boxes and 400 snack options, your brain gets tired, and that's when your default risk goes through the roof. You end up reaching for the brand you saw on the end cap or grabbing the 2 for $7 deal even if you only came in for 1. Every one of these tiny nudges adds a few dollars to your bill, and when you spread that across millions of shoppers, this friction basically mints money. The manipulation starts the second you grab a cart with those annoying, wobbly front wheels. Believe it or not, that's often on purpose because a slower, clunkier cart keeps you in the aisles for a longer period of time. You'll notice the lighting shifts to a warmer glow near the bakery, and sometimes a hint of vanilla is actually pumped through the vents to make you feel cozy. Those misters that spritz the lettuce aren't actually helping the vegetables. It actually makes some produce rot faster, but the glistening water beads signal fresh to your brain. Meanwhile, the background music stays at a chill 70 beats per minute when they want you to linger, but they'll crank the tempo near closing time to hurry you up. What you don't see is the planogram, which is a hyper-detailed map of exactly where every single item sits on the shelf. These maps are basically legal contracts that dictate shelf positions, heights, and even how many hooks are used for gum and chargers at the checkout line. Everything is dialed in to move the highest margin products, which is why kids' eye level is packed with sugary pouches and cartoon boxes. Adult eye level is reserved for the mid-tier products the sponsors are desperate to push, while the lowest shelves hold the bulk items or generics that you have to bend down to reach. Most people won't bother with the physical tax of bending over, so they just buy the more expensive option right in front of them. The checkout line is its own special kind of trap, designed to squeeze a few more dollars out of you. The corrals snake you past racks of impulse buys like candy, magazines, and phone cables, while you wait just long enough to get a little bored or anxious. Even self-checkout is a bit of a trick because it's pitched as a way to save time, but it really just pushes the labor onto you for free. You deal with the scan errors and the bagging prompts while the store keeps its staff counts low to save on overhead. When theft or shrink goes up because of these machines, the chains use it as an excuse to hike prices even further. You're essentially working for the store and paying for the privilege, and the corporate spreadsheet just calls it efficiency. Imagine a dad running in for a gallon of milk on a Tuesday night after a long day at work. He parks and has to walk a long diagonal path past the grills and patio sets because the seasonal stuff is always parked right by the door. He hits the produce section and grabs some strawberries because they look glowing under the halogen lights, and he knows his kid likes them. The smell of bread hits him, so he adds a loaf to his arm, and then he finally reaches the milk way in the back. On his way to the front, an end cap screams, family-sized cereal at a club price, so he tosses that in too. By the time he leaves, he's spent $51 on things he didn't plan to buy, and he'll probably be back to do it all again next week. The real impact is that your routine shopping trips become little ambushes that drain your cash and your mental energy. You head home feeling a bit more frazzled and resigned, and when you multiply that by every workday and weekend, you're stuck in a loop of earning, spending, and scrolling. For the big chains, this loop prints steady growth through paid placements and rebate checks from manufacturers that pad their margins even when fewer people are walking through the door. Because these data-driven maps run the floor, human judgment is totally gone, and a manager can't even move the staples forward to help customers without corporate getting upset. We also have to talk about the fact that fresh is often a total illusion maintained by glossy waxes and sprays. Pre-cut fruit packs are stacked under the brightest lights because they have huge profit margins, meaning you're paying a premium for labor you would have done yourself 20 years ago. Organic sections are usually placed right next to premium snack aisles to create a halo effect that makes the junk food feel healthier by association. Even your loyalty app is watching you, tracking your patterns so it can offer personalized deals that steer you toward higher margin swaps. If you feel like the price you see is different from what your neighbor sees, you aren't crazy. That's just dynamic promo logic at work. You might be surprised to learn that this maze logic extends to hardware stores and pharmacies as well. The walkways are widened specifically to slow your pace, and the aisles are designed to zigzag so you can't see the exit too clearly. Essential items are often split between different departments to force you to cross more territory and see more products. Even the bathrooms are usually tucked deep in the back near customer service just to pull you through the entire store one more time. When a store finally does a remodel, they're just resetting the sightlines and reselling the end caps, forcing you to relearn the map so you'll wander more and buy things you don't need. So at the end of the day, who's actually profiting from all this friction? It's the big brands that can afford the eye-level rent and the chains that sell the same shelf space twice, once to the supplier and once to you. Data brokers are also making a killing by slicing your shopping basket into digital models they can sell to advertisers. The efficiency pitch keeps rolling along, with robots now scanning the shelves at midnight to find gaps and reorder the items that sell the fastest. You just get a few cents off for buying 3 of something you didn't want, a coupon for a snack you don't need, and the nagging feeling that you're always one errand behind. Office productivity, lights, noise, and burnout. If the retail store is a maze designed to take your money, then your office is a battery where you plug in, drain your energy, and repeat the cycle. The open-plan office was originally sold to us as a miracle that would tear down walls and spark brilliant new ideas while saving the company money on rent. What actually happened was that people just learned how to duck and hide from their coworkers. Face-to-face conversations actually dropped off, digital pings exploded, and the constant noise floor made it impossible for anyone to actually think. Now, you wear your noise-canceling headphones like earmuffs and book conference rooms just to have a door you can close for 20 minutes. The stakes here are your mental health, your time, and even the quality of your sleep. Open rooms create a constant, low-level sense of threat from footsteps behind you, sudden loud laughs, or the clatter of dishes in the break room. Every time you get startled, it steals your focus, and then the overhead lighting piles on the misery. Those blue heavy LEDs claim to mimic daylight, but at 2 in the afternoon, they're just giving your brain a false caffeine spike. By 5 o'clock, they're still telling your brain it's high noon, which totally messes with your internal clock and makes it harder to wind down at night. The cheap drivers in those lights often have a flicker that you can't see with your eyes, but your brain definitely feels it. This invisible flickering triggers headaches, eye strain, and that weirdly aggressive type of exhaustion that you can't quite put a name to. On top of that, the air in the building has often been breathed 3 times already because bringing in fresh air costs the company extra money. By lunchtime, the CO2 levels are often high enough to actually slow down your decision-making process. Then they add hot desking to the mix, which means you have no home base and no place for a plant, leaving you on a daily hunt for a quiet corner and a working outlet. Imagine a company that knocks out all its private offices to increase collaboration and turns the workspace into rows of benches with 12 people per row. They install a sensor grid to track utilization, but the problem is that it only sees butts in seats rather than actual brains at work. On the first day, the constant chatter feels kind of fun and social, but by the 3rd day, everyone stops talking because they realize the entire floor can hear their business. Studies actually show that when you move to an open plan, face-to-face interaction drops and digital messaging surges because people are trying to find privacy. The corporate metric says utilization is up, but the actual work output says otherwise. Meanwhile, the facilities team tunes the LEDs to a cold, sterile color because it looks modern on a brochure. Because the drivers are the cheapest ones available, they have that micro-flicker that gives everyone a dull throb behind their eyes by mid-afternoon. Most people don't complain about migraines. They just squint and rub their temples while the HVAC system recirculates the same old air to save on energy bill. You don't really notice how bad it is until a meeting room starts feeling stuffy and everyone starts yawning. If someone brought a CO2 meter into that room, they'd see the levels climbing over 1,000 parts per million, making everyone's ideas feel dull and sluggish. Then you have the joy of desk hoteling, where you show up at 9 in the morning with your laptop and a cold coffee. The digital map shows a few green dots for open seats, but you quickly realize all the quiet spots were snatched up by the early birds at 7. You end up landing right next to the printer, where every 5 minutes you hear a whine and a thump while someone leans over your shoulder to grab their documents. You try to move the next day, but you end up sitting across from a guy who is on loud sales calls all morning. This kind of stress isn't dramatic or loud. It's just a small, constant drip that never stops until you're totally drained. Meeting culture makes the whole situation even worse because calendars fill up simply because rooms are the only places left with any privacy. A quick 30-minute catch-up somehow turns into an hour-long ordeal with 8 people because the software defaults to that time block. Managers love to see more bodies in a room because it looks like momentum, and they count software seats as engagement to prove people are working. The lease renewals always brag about collaboration zones that nobody actually uses unless they have heavy-duty headphones on. The productivity charts are tracking how busy you look, not how deep your work actually goes. I heard a story about a project manager who slept perfectly on the weekends but started waking up at 3 in the morning every single work night. He thought it was the coffee, so he switched to tea, but he still couldn't stay asleep during the week. A friend finally handed him a cheap flicker meter, and he realized the reading on his specific desk was off the charts. He asked the facilities team to swap out the light drivers in his row as a pilot program, and his headaches disappeared within a week. He ended up buying his own desk lamp with a warm, steady light and a small HEPA filter to clean the air around his desk. The real impact is that the office becomes a place that actively bleeds your focus, while the company tries to sell the fix as part of the culture. Burnout is usually treated as a performance issue rather than a natural reaction to a building that nags your senses all day long. Turnover starts to rise and the smartest people leave, while the landlords keep pitching amenities like beer taps and ping-pong tables. HR might push a wellness app to help you cope, but nobody ever thinks to adjust the outside air intake or tune the light spectrum. The message from the top stays the same. Show up, sit anywhere, and answer your emails faster. But here is where things can actually start to change for the better. When teams start measuring what actually matters, like code 2 levels and light flicker, they finally get some leverage with the higher-ups. A hard graph of air quality usually beats a vibe every single time. Simple shifts can move the needle, like bringing in more outside air, adding quiet zones with actual doors, and giving people a stable desk they can call their own. When you add task lights with warm output and acoustic panels to break up the noise, the headaches stop and the real conversations return. This isn't about being against collaboration, it's about being pro-human. You might be surprised to learn that fixing these issues often saves the company a ton of money in the long run. There are fewer sick days, fewer people quitting, and fewer redundant meetings that go nowhere. When people have the focused time they need to actually ship their work, the spreadsheet finally reflects the value of a healthy environment. Until that happens, the efficiency story will keep winning because it's cheaper on paper to pack bodies together and call the noise creative buzz. The true cost of a bad office doesn't show up on the rent check. It shows up in your Sunday night dread and your Monday morning dumb costs. Subscriptions for breathing. Moving from office fatigue to home fatigue is usually just one tap on your phone, but these days, that tap comes with a monthly bill. Did you know the lock on your front door can basically charge you rent? Smart locks, cameras, and thermostats almost all tease you with cool features, only to tuck the stuff you actually want behind a pesky subscription. If you want more than a single day of video history to see who stopped by while you were on vacation, you're going to need a plan. If you want person detection or special zones for your packages, that's another plan, which means you bought the hardware. But the actual brains of the device live on a server that bills you every month. Here is what's really at stake. A house used to be about capital and care, but now it's becoming a bundle of never-ending micro-fees. You might pay $5 for video history, $10 for pro automations, and $15 for a whole home package. While those amounts feel small on their own, once you stack them with cloud storage and security monitoring, you're suddenly paying a cable bill just to run your doorknob. If you decide to stop paying, that expensive box on your wall just keeps blinking. Only now it's a lot dumber than when you bought it. It usually starts with a simple action, like setting up a smart thermostat because your utility company offered a nice rebate. The device looks slick and learns your schedule perfectly, but then it sends a little nudge suggesting you save more with advanced features. Of course, those features require a monthly sub, and the app will probably ask to share your data with partners to optimize comfort while it's at it. You likely say yes just to clear the annoying pop-up, and meanwhile, your lock app pushes an update that moves guest codes from the free tier to the paid one. Your camera company might even email you saying they're retiring your old plan, forcing you to either accept less history or pay more to keep what you already had. The hardware is still perfectly fine, but the business model changed underneath you. Planned incompatibility is what really makes this trap stick. You might buy a smart bulb that claims to work with your favorite voice assistant, but a year later, a software update lands, and suddenly that connection breaks unless you buy a brand new hub. Your door sensors might stop talking to your cameras unless you sign into a combined cloud service, which is frustrating because local control was the original promise. Remote servers are the reality now, and when big companies merge, your favorite features get moved, renamed, or quietly killed off. The light still turns on, but the automations that actually made it useful vanish behind a paywall or just disappear entirely. Firmware fragility is the quiet killer in this ecosystem. Updates are supposed to fix bugs, but they also have a habit of flipping switches you didn't ask for. One day your camera records locally to an SD card, and the next, it suddenly requires a cloud upload if you want smart alerts to work. You might get a sunset notice for your doorbell telling you that support ends in a year, which is a nice way of saying the device is expiring. You can keep using it as is, but you won't get security patches, and the app might stop connecting if the backend tech gets too old. Even if the device looks brand new, it's functionally retired, and you're left holding a very expensive brick with a wide-angle lens. Then we have the consumables treadmill that keeps you spending. Air purifiers will beep for a filter change every 3 months even if your air is crystal clear, and some models will actually lock your fan speeds until you swap in a branded cartridge. Water filters use push alerts and glowing red rings to trigger a little bit of guilt every time you walk past the fridge for a glass of water. Robot vacuums are designed to eat through bags and brushes on a strict schedule, much like coffee pods or printer ink. Your house is basically whispering, "Buy a refill," like a constant mantra, and smart tech just makes that whisper louder and perfectly timed to your payday. Let me tell you a quick story about how this plays out. A couple buys a camera bundle after their bikes get stolen, and during the first month, they catch some porch pirates, so the cost feels totally worth it. By month 3, a neighborhood kid bikes by and triggers 50 clips they can't even watch because their basic plan only holds 24 hours of footage. They upgrade to the next tier, but by month 6, they get an email saying improved person detection is now a premium-only feature for an extra $2. In month 9, the company shuts down an old cloud region, forcing them to spend a whole Saturday repairing devices and losing all their favorite saved clips. By year 2, the doorbell starts dropping notifications unless they reboot it weekly, and support just suggests buying the new model that happens to be on sale. The old one ends up in a junk drawer, but the monthly plan keeps billing. The real kicker is the data exhaust you leave behind. Every single click, schedule change, and sensor trigger gets logged, from when you open your door to when you turn up the heat. That data is used to improve services, but it also helps companies target you with upsells and specific pricing. Insurance discounts that were tied to your monitored alarm can actually turn into penalties if you try to cancel the server. Even utilities offer rebates that give them the right to tweak your AC settings on hot days. So while you save a few bucks, you're also handing over the steering wheel of your own home. So what's the real impact here? Your home is no longer just a place to live. It's a platform where you are the user, the product, and the person paying the bills. These little fees slowly bleed your budget dry, while updates you never asked for change how your own belongings work. When something finally breaks, it's not a simple hinge you can fix with some oil. It's a problem in a cloud you can't even see. If you try to push back against it, the system is designed to make basic living feel like you're downgrading your life. You might be surprised to learn that you can actually blunt the impact of this. Try to choose gear that works locally without being locked into a specific cloud, and look for "no subscription needed" written in plain text on the box. It's better to favor open standards that won't break just because two brands decide to stop playing nice with each other. Pick devices that have replaceable parts and filters you can buy from anywhere, not just the original manufacturer. Most importantly, ask yourself if you really need a smart lock or if a high-quality traditional lock is better. Sometimes a thermostat with a steady schedule and physical buttons is the smartest thing you can put in your house. The permit Gauntlet, code as a moat. You walk up to the permit counter thinking you're just going to fix that one thing that keeps breaking, but then the plan checker slides a sheet of paper across the desk. It's covered in 5-letter acronyms and a product list that looks like a shopping cart written by a corporate lobbyist. Now, safety obviously matters because nobody wants their roof collapsing into their kitchen or their wires sparking a fire. However, somewhere along the line, parts of the building code turned into a moat that only the biggest vendors can cross, and you're the one stuck paying the toll. The stakes are higher than you think. If every upgrade requires proprietary parts and certified installers, the price of doing things the right way skyrockets while your timeline stretches out for months. The massive companies that can afford to sit on standards committees are the ones writing the tests that perfectly match their own products. Small, durable companies often don't get listed at all, which means inspectors can't approve them even if their products work better and last longer. Your choices get narrowed down to a specific catalog, and that catalog is curated by the very people who make the stuff inside it. Here is how it works in practice. You submit a permit to fix a cracked wall and install a vent that actually moves some air, but the counter tells you a plaster has to meet a specific test. As it turns out, that test is only performed by 2 expensive labs, and your vent has to meet an airflow spec tied to a certified fan series. Even if you have a beautiful wood window you could easily repair, it's not on the pre-approved list, so you're told to buy a vinyl one with a sticker instead. The inspector isn't the bad guy here. He's just boxed in by proprietary standards that were embedded into the code by trade groups who paid for a seat at the table. While you're arguing over windows, the delays start costing you serious money. Permits can sit for weeks at a time, and every day a dumpster sits in your driveway, you're paying a rental fee. Your contractor has to juggle other crews, so if your job gets paused, you might drop all the way to the bottom of his list. The carrying costs really start to pile up, especially if you're paying interest on a loan or losing rent because a unit is sitting empty. Under that kind of pressure, you'll probably take the path of least resistance, factory parts and approved SKUs, because anything unfamiliar just triggers more questions. Durable methods that require a skilled craftsperson and a bit more time just don't make sense when the clock is ticking this fast. I heard a story about a homeowner who wanted to replace some broken drywall in a damp basement with lime plaster. It's a more breathable and longer-lasting material, and he even brought in white papers and moisture diagrams to prove it. The plan checker just smiled and asked to see the listing. But there wasn't one because nobody is going to pay a lab to certify a method that's worked for 100 years. He was told to use cheap paper-faced drywall and a dehumidifier instead. And 3 summers later, the whole corner of his basement smelled like wet cardboard. HOA rules and developer covenants only make things worse by dictating approved colors and siding materials. They often forbid visible repairs unless you use matching materials, which is just code for saying you can't use a beefy, repairable railing. Instead, you're forced to use the hollow, synthetic stuff the builder chose, which usually cracks and turns chalky under the summer sun. If you try to switch to a metal roof that would literally outlive you, they'll tell you it's not consistent with community character. That character is usually just a glossy brochure tied to a warranty that's way too short. Then you have the green upsells that promise efficiency but ignore longevity. You'll get pitched on dashboards and sensors that show you fancy kilowatt charts and give you shiny plaques for being eco-friendly. What they don't show you are the repair scores or the expected years to failure for those complex systems. A vendor bundle often nails you to their specific portal, and the service contracts usually have penalties if you try to switch to someone else. Even school districts get caught in this when they buy building controls with optimization clauses that look cheap up front, but have massive exit fees later. Across town, a different builder might try to use fire-rated mineral plaster and solid wood doors for a small renovation project. The code technically allows for equivalence, but the test to prove that equivalence requires a furnace burn at a lab that charges as much as a new car. Meanwhile, a vendor selling common foam panels offers a nice rebate and a pre-stamped letter that makes everything easy. Since the bank's underwriter loves seeing paper with official stamps, you can probably guess which way the project ends up tilting. Permit delays have a gravity all their own that pulls projects toward the path of least resistance. A city with a short-staffed office will let files stack up, and when reviews finally come back, they're full of comments that just punt the problem down the road. They'll ask you to clarify or provide a product listing, and each one of those requests adds weeks to your timeline. Durable, high-quality details often die by 1,000 paper cuts because the fast and familiar stuff sails through the system. The plan checker has seen the cheap stuff 100 times and knows the inspector won't get in trouble for signing off on it. The result of all this is that the building code narrows the field to only the vendors who can afford to play the game. Innovation that doesn't fit into a neat catalog gets stalled out, and builders learn to avoid anything that might trigger a second review. We end up defaulting to assemblies that are thin and flimsy, but technically compliant with the rules. Homeowners learn to fear the permit process because it usually means massive delays and budget overages, so they either overpay for short-lived systems or go to the gray market. Either way, the moat works perfectly. Big players sell more, small options wither away, and you keep living in a house that needs expensive upgrades on a fixed schedule. You might be surprised to learn that there is actually some wiggle room if you know where to look. Some inspectors genuinely love performance paths, where you prove an assembly works with hard numbers rather than just stickers. Some cities even publish their own, pre-approved, durable details for things like plaster specs or wood window repairs that pass without needing a brand name. When residents show up with clean data and ask for equivalency instead of just asking for an exception, doors can start to open. The problem is that this takes a lot of time, and the system is betting that you don't have any to spare. In the end, the Gauntlet is there to keep you in line. Safety is used as the shield, but corporate capture is the real handle on the sword. The fastest way through the process is often the very thing that locks in the failure modes we've been talking about this whole time. regional grip, finance, insurance, and disaster math. If you zoom out from your own front door, you start to see a much bigger hand on the steering wheel. The way our entire regions look isn't just a matter of local taste or random chance, because it's actually dictated by how money, risk, and regulations line up. We're talking about mortgages, insurance policies, disaster laws, and appraisal. While each of those pieces sounds incredibly boring on its own, they work together to decide what gets built, what gets fixed, and what is destined to fail right on schedule. Let's start with mortgages, because lenders absolutely hate surprises and they live for the word conforming. To a bank, that means they want to see predictable floor plans, standard materials, and easy-to-find sales comparisons. A bank officer isn't going to tour your clever passive cooling courtyard and think it's a great innovation. Instead, they are just scrolling through a mental checklist. When the boxes are checked, the loan closes, but unfamiliar details tend to spook underwriters. This is exactly why builders default to cookie-cutter specs that have already passed 1,000 times before. It isn't that the standard product is actually better, it's just much easier to get the bank to say yes to it. Insurance only tightens that box further. Most policies are full of exclusions you won't even notice until you try to file a claim. Some carriers actually push specific approved building methods that are fast to price and easy to replace, even if those materials age terribly over time. If you try to install a roof that lasts 50 years and can be repaired one panel at a time, the premium model might not even reward you for it. Actuarial tables are built on the common, cheap stuff that fails more often. So you end up paying the same or more for a better product, while the spreadsheet assumes you'll just rip it all out and replace it like everyone else. Then we have to add in the disaster math that happens after a storm or a fire. When the like-for-like rules kick in, the goal is to help people rebuild as fast as possible, but the catch is that this often locks in the exact same failure modes. If your house flooded because of paper-faced drywall and cheap fiberboard cabinets, the default path to getting your money is to install more paper-faced drywall and fiberboard cabinets. Even if the building code allows for better upgrades, the funding streams and insurance adjusters usually push for speed and sameness. Since there are so few ways to step off this treadmill, entire neighborhoods basically just reset the timer until the next flood happened. The stakes here are actually pretty high. In a world that's getting warmer, heat waves hammer the power grid and your ability to focus, while floods hit places that never expected to see water inside the living room. The design choices we locked in through finance and insurance will either help people ride this out or turn every single summer into a massive new bill. Right now, the system prices risk through a very narrow lens, looking at one specific roof or one floodplain without counting the long-term human cost. Because the maps and data lag behind reality, people get stuck in a gap where they are technically outside a hazard area, even though their basement was a pond just last month. You can see this in action everywhere. Imagine a small builder proposes a mixed-use corner building with wood windows, lime plaster walls, shaded sidewalks, and a roof you can fix by hand. The bank immediately flags those as non-standard finishes. The appraiser can't find any nearby examples to prove the value of walkability, and the final loan offer completely tanks. However, if that same builder draws up a drive-through pad with vinyl walls and a standard warranty packet, they get a quick yes. There are 10 other identical pad sites nearby to compare it against, so the bank feels safe. Across town, you might see an insurer rolling out a preferred vendor program. They offer homeowners a discount if they agree to use a specific network of contractors when it's time to file a claim. That list usually leans toward major brands with short warranties and crews that specialize in fast, easy installation. When a homeowner with a hail-damaged roof asks about using a thicker gauge of metal with a high wind rating, the adjuster usually says that's fine, but the payout is only based on the price of standard shingles. The owner has to pay the difference out of pocket, so most people just take the free roof and the cycle repeats during the next big storm. Meanwhile, cities are busy floating infrastructure bonds to stretch roads and pipes out to a brand new ring of subdivisions. The math behind these moves assumes that future growth will eventually pay off the debt. Even though the tax yield per acre out there is incredibly low, the ribbon-cutting ceremony looks great for the local politicians. 10 years later, the maintenance bill finally comes due, and there isn't nearly enough revenue to cover the repair. Pipes start cracking and the roads fall apart, but the city has already chewed through its budget. It's a growth-on-credit loop happening at a regional scale, and the bill lands on taxpayers who never even voted for the cul-de-sac that now needs a new pump. I have a micro-story that illustrates this perfectly. After a hurricane, a family in a small ranch house tears out 4 feet of soggy drywall and waits months for a contractor who is fully booked. The city has a substantial damage rule that forces them to elevate the whole house if the repairs cost too much, so they make sure to stay under that price threshold. They put the exact same cheap walls back in, and by the next summer, mold is blooming in the closet because the paper backing soaked up water they couldn't see. An inspector mentions that a moisture-tolerant plaster could have prevented this, but it wasn't on the approved vendor list. The family just sighs and buys more paint. Appraisal bias is what really seals the fate of our neighborhoods. Things like walkability, short commutes, and mixed-use blocks actually generate much higher taxes per acre and create stronger small business ecosystems. Unfortunately, the spreadsheets only care about how many garages you have, the total square footage, and the bedroom count. A house sitting over a corner store might be worth less on paper than a big house in a car-only subdivision, even if the corner home allows you to live without a car and spend 3 extra hours a week with your kids. The buyers can feel those savings in their daily lives, but the bank's spreadsheet simply doesn't see it. So what's the real impact? Our regions are drifting toward fragile patterns because the money shaping them prefers familiar parts and fast closings. Durable, repairable places that bring people together struggle to make financial sense even when they work much better for the humans living there. Insurers are hiking rates or pulling out of entire zip codes, which pushes people toward cheap fixes that are guaranteed to fail again. Disaster aid just rebuilds what just broke, and the bond math puts cities on a treadmill where they spread out now only to get squeezed later. You might be surprised to learn that there are finally some cracks in this system. Some lenders are quietly starting to pilot loans for accessory units and small mixed-use buildings because they've noticed that the default rates are actually very low. A few insurance companies are cutting premiums for fire-rated roofs and real defensible space rather than just selling apps and alarms. After some of the biggest fires and floods, certain building codes now allow for betterment, which lets people build back smarter if they meet performance targets. Cities that actually run the numbers on tax revenue are starting to chase infill projects instead of far-edge booms. It isn't happening everywhere yet, but it's proof the map can change when the money finally admits what actually profits and how they coordinate. While all of that was happening on your block, a quiet coalition across the industry was busy setting the rules. It isn't some secret cabal meeting in a basement. It's more like a highly organized relay team. Developers run the first leg of the race by taking a piece of dirt and drawing standard boxes that lenders will approve without asking questions. Then the materials giants hand them the baton, offering catalogs full of products that install fast and come with authorized installer networks. Big box retailers and distributors anchor the middle of the race by guaranteeing inventory and using co-op ads to keep durable, unique products off the shelves. Finally, finance sprints the last leg, wrapping everything into loans and REITs to push the cycle all over again. This is how the flywheel keeps spinning. Trade groups, which are usually funded by those same big vendors, are the ones who draft the model codes and best practices for cities to use. The language they use sounds totally neutral, using words like resilience, efficiency, and choice. However, the tests tucked inside those codes often require proprietary standards that cost a fortune to pass. This means only the brands with the deepest pockets ever get their products listed. When a city adopts these models by the book, the local inspectors basically become gatekeepers for that specific catalog. Builders learn very quickly that if they use the listed products and stay on the preferred vendor list, their project timeline will glide right through. If they try something durable that isn't in the catalog, they end up wasting time explaining themselves to a plan checker while their costs skyrocket. At the same time, education is used to smooth out any rough edges. Corporate sponsorships fund the continuing education credits that architects and inspectors need to keep their licenses. The slide decks at these seminars show off shiny dashboards and total cost of ownership, charts that conveniently ignore how long a product actually lasts or if it can even be fixed. These authorized installer trainings turn skilled tradespeople into brand channels, where good techs are boxed into one system and paid to tell you that any other system is too risky. None of this looks sketchy when you're in the room. It just looks professional, complete with free coffee, lanyards, and a certificate at the end. You have to realize that the price you see isn't just the price. It's actually a mix of rebates, co-op ads, and back-end checks. A developer who locks a building into one specific family of tapes, sealants, and fasteners usually earns a big check later on, and that money really matters when profit margins are thin. Retailers are basically selling their floor space twice. Once to the brands buying the best placement, and once to you at the cash register. A new company with a slow, repairable product can be much better in real life and still lose the battle because they can't afford the prime shelf space. The spreadsheet doesn't care if a product breaks in year 7. It only cares how fast it sells in the second quarter. The finance world keeps score using pictures rather than reality. A building that looks modern with new floors, bright lights, and gleaming glass will win a huge appraisal bump even if the actual guts of the building got cheaper. Landlords often time their refreshes to match up with their refinancing windows. This makes maintenance feel like set dressing, where they swap out ceiling tiles and repaint hallways with trendy colors just to get a better rate on their loan. The tenants might get headaches from the cheap materials, but the bank's model smiles at the churn because it looks like the building is being cared for. Retailers are playing the exact same game using your data. They use loyalty apps and personalized deals to create a loop that optimizes for how much profit they can get out of every minute you spend in the store. The space at the end of the aisles is auctioned off to the highest bidder, and the power perimeter design of the store is templated and shipped nationwide. If a specific tactic helps increase the average basket size in Kansas, you can bet it will be rolled out to Seattle by the next month. The whole machine coordinates, because the software makes it easy and the suppliers are paying to make it happen. Down at City Hall, this coordination shows up in the form of very nice folders. The text for new model codes often arrives pre-baked and ready to sign. Trade associations offer to help the city staff harmonize their rules with what they call best practices. Local chambers of commerce host luncheons where parking reform ideas go to die under a slideshow about losing shoppers, while the big box representative just nods along in the back. State manuals bless highway designs that move cars quickly through valuable land, and then they have the nerve to call it a safety measure. The local corner store can't even show up to testify because the zoning laws banned them 20 years ago. The media rounds out the whole cycle. Sponsored home trends tell you that you need shiplap and greige walls this season, only to tell you that waterfall counters are the must-have item the next year. Productivity blogs will hype up open-plan offices, then switch to activity-based working, always making sure to include a quote from a vendor who sells the furniture fixed. If people start burning out in these environments, the headlines usually blame their personal habits rather than the lack of air, light, or a simple room with a door. Here is one last micro-story to tie it together. A mid-sized developer is sitting in a meeting with a lender. The lender immediately flags the non-standard specs on a small renovation project that includes mineral plaster and shaded balconies. The appraiser says they can't find any nearby examples to prove that walkability has any value. Meanwhile, across the hall, a boring concrete building with a big box store and a massive parking lot is getting approved instantly. The loan officer just taps the safer stack of papers. The developer sighs, opens the standard catalog, and calls a meeting to collect their rebates. The impact of all this is a self-reinforcing loop that's hard to break. Vendors shape the tests, those tests shape the codes shape what's on the shelves, and the shelves shape what actually gets built. Those buildings then shape the appraisals, which shape the loans, and the loans ultimately decide what breaks and when. There is no smoke-filled room where this is decided. It's just a set of incentives that line up so perfectly they feel like fate. When someone finally tries to break rank and use something breathable or fixable, the system just politely asks to see the official listing before pointing them right back into the maze. Okay, the receipts are ugly, but now it's time for the turn. The reversal, efficiency that actually works. So here's the big flip. Efficiency isn't actually the villain of our story. Fake efficiency is. Real efficiency is usually pretty boring because it just works and keeps on working without making a scene. You can find it in neighborhoods that chose durability and being close to things over shiny, disposable trends. Let's take a walk through a few blocks where the financial meter actually runs backward for a chain. Start on a little street lined with trees and shop fronts tucked under apartments. Did you know that cities track their tax revenue by the individual parcel of land? In these 15-minute districts, the tax collected per acre beats those giant big-box stores by a mile, and the city actually spends way less per person on things like pipes and road mile. There are fewer massive stroads to repave, shorter runs for water and sewer lines, and more people living close together to share the total cost. Police and fire stations get calls that are closer to home, trash routes shrink down, and that scary maintenance cliff the city is facing starts to level out. People end up walking because everything they need is right there, not because some glossy brochure told them it was a good idea. Their car costs just drop naturally, without anyone giving them a lecture about it. Now let's imagine opening up a wall in a different kind of house. You'll find lime plaster over wood lath, solid wood trim that you can actually sand down, and hardware that unscrews with a normal screwdriver. If a leak stains the corner, nobody has to panic and tear the whole room apart. You just score the crack, wet down the edges, push in some new plaster, and paint a small square to finish the job. If the wood floors look tired, you refinish them instead of ripping them out for plastic clicking planks. When the windows get sticky, you strip the old paint, replace the sash cords, and add some weather stripping to keep the original wood. These modular parts mean that small failures stay small, stretching the service life of the home from 10 years to 50 because the house actually accepts being patched up. Passive design does this same clever trick with energy by using simple physics instead of expensive gadgets. It's all about an orientation that pulls in the winter sun while blocking out that brutal summer glare. You use overhangs sized perfectly for your latitude, not just for the vibes of the architecture. It relies on cross-ventilation that actually moves the air when the temperature dips at night, or a courtyard that lets the whole building breathe. Light shelves can bounce sunshine deep into a room without blasting your eyes, and shade trees can drop your roof temperature by 15 degrees on a hot August afternoon. There's no app to download and no monthly subscription to pay, just the way the world works. Bills go down while comfort goes up, and at 2 in the morning, that's really the only metric that matters. Now look at the new zoning pilots that are finally putting this logic on the map. A city decides to trim down its parking minimums and legalizes the missing middle, which includes things like duplexes, fourplexes, and little corner shops with flats above them. Builders who used to drive right past empty lots suddenly start to see how they can make infill projects work. The tax revenue per acre goes up while the cost of infrastructure per front door goes down. A block that felt like it was sleeping starts to feel warm again, with kids on bikes, elders hanging out on porches, and a tiny cafe with a bell on the door. The city spreadsheet finally starts to reflect what the people living there have been feeling all along. Back at the office, the teams who measure things like air quality and natural light are finally getting their brains back. They start adding real outside air so the CO2 levels stay under 800, which keeps everyone from feeling like they need a nap at noon. They swap out those flickery light drivers for steady ones and warm up the color of the bulbs to match the natural rhythm of the morning and afternoon. Instead of wide-open warehouses, they carve out quiet rooms with real doors and soft walls where you can actually hear yourself think. They give people stable desks they can call their own instead of making them go on a scavenger hunt every morning. Then they add activity spaces as a choice rather than a requirement. Headaches start to disappear. The frantic energy on Slack cools down, and total output climbs because deep work finally has a permanent address again. Here's a quick story about how this looks in the real world. A landlord with a tired block of old walk-up apartments decides to stop doing those cheap lipstick flips. Instead of just painting over problems, he patches the original plaster and restores the wood windows with interior storms. He shades the west-facing walls with vines and trellises, swaps in mineral wool insulation whenever he opens a wall, and fine-tunes the ventilation. The rents don't have to spike, and the number of people moving out every year falls off a cliff. Tenants decide to stay, which always beats the math of having an empty unit. His long-term costs look a bit weird to the bank at first, but then his maintenance log shows fewer emergency calls and much longer leases. He only has to refinance once, rather than every single time a new design trend shifts. In another town, a small city decides to kill off a half-mile of a dangerous road by shrinking the lanes and planting trees. They add raised crosswalks every 200 feet and legalize corner stores by right so people can actually shop where they live. The result is that crashes drop and retail sales start to tick up. A small grocery store slips into a renovated brick building with only 15 parking spots and a big bike corral. People living in a 6-block radius realize they can cut out one of their cars, which puts about $10,000 per year back into their pockets. They end up spending that money at the shops nearby, and the city's bond rating improves because they have stabilized revenue instead of just risky growth at the edge of town. So if this is so great, why aren't we doing it everywhere? It's mostly because the old incentives still pay out well for the people in charge, and these wins take a full year to show up instead of just one financial quarter. But the receipts are right there for anyone to see. Lower lifetime costs, calmer rooms, shorter trips, and much steadier balance sheets. Real efficiency isn't some complicated digital dashboard you have to monitor. It's just a day where nothing breaks, and you actually end your shift with enough time to sit on a stoop and breathe. Resistance mechanisms. How the system fights back. If real efficiency works so well, you'd think it would spread like a good rumor, right? Well, the reason it doesn't is that the current system has some pretty heavy-duty defenses, including soft power, scary stories, and contracts that look boring until you read the fine print. It usually starts with the word safety. Anytime someone tries to legalize a backyard cottage, a corner store, or a flexible building code, they get hit with a massive fear campaign. Mailers show up in your mailbox with worst-case photos of collapsing sheds, fire traps, and cars circling the block, forever looking for a spot. Insurance companies and trade groups love to amplify these rare edge cases because they make money by selling certainty and branded fixes. A local council member will hold up a scary headline about one garage apartment that went wrong and claim we just can't take the risk. Meanwhile, all the quiet data about safe, code-compliant homes in cities that allow them never makes it onto the nightly news. Fear can win a political argument in a week, while real reform takes a year to even get a hearing. Traffic modeling plays this same game using a very specific kind of math. The baseline for these models assumes that almost every trip will be taken by car and that adding extra lanes is the only way to cure a delay. Then the model proves exactly what it was told to prove. You need more lanes. The concept of induced demand, which is the well-proven fact that wider roads just invite more people to drive, gets left out of the default settings entirely. When you ask the engineers to count it, they'll tell you the official manual doesn't support that specific method. So these massive road projects move forward on rails. They widen the road, add a signal, put in a buffer, and then repeat the whole thing. When the traffic jams inevitably return, the model just shrugs and says the only fix is more of the same. Even the green movement gets captured by this kind of thinking. Government grants often arrive tied to specific digital dashboards and proprietary tech kits. The goals sound really noble, things like optimizing energy use or monitoring wellness, but you can only hit those targets if you buy the sponsor's specific software stack. A city will chase the points to look good, buy into a closed system, and then realize the annual optimization fee is the biggest line item in their budget. Meanwhile, simple passive fixes like planting shade trees or designing for natural daylight don't come with a fancy app, so they don't count toward the score. The procurement documents never bother to ask about how long something will last or if it can be repaired. They only care about the analytics. Vendor lock-in is basically the municipal version of getting trapped in a smart home ecosystem. Cities and school districts sign long-term service contracts that include clauses that make it almost impossible to switch to a competitor. A school district might buy building controls that only a certified technician from one specific company is allowed to touch. The help desk routes every single problem through a corporate portal, and when the system inevitably underperforms, the vendor just offers a paid upgrade as the solution. If you try to add an open-source component to fix it yourself, the warranty suddenly becomes void. You're essentially captured, and the only way out is a massive rip-and-replace project that no politician is ever going to approve. The media helps this cycle along by shifting all the blame back onto you as an individual. If you're tired, they tell you to fix your morning routine. If you're broke, they say you need to stop buying lattes. If you're burned out, they suggest you try a gratitude journal. What they rarely mention is that the street outside your house is hostile, the office lights are literally frying your brain, and your home is full of cheap stuff on timers. It is much cheaper to sell the idea of personal responsibility than it is to actually reform the way we design our world. And besides, it doesn't threaten the people buying the ads. So the story stays focused on your habits instead of their broken system. Here's a little story about how this plays out on the ground. A neighborhood tries to legalize small duplexes on corner lots to help with the housing shortage. Suddenly, a flyer lands on every doorstep that says, "Save our parking," in big, bold letters. It shows a photo of a jammed curb from a festival that happened a mile away, and the next public meeting turns into a screaming match about car count. A month later, the city ends up cutting the parking requirements for one specific big project anyway, mostly because the developer offered a shared lot deal with a big chain gym. The small, helpful reform dies in the cradle while the big corporate project sails right through. The message is pretty clear. Change is only allowed if there's a big enough sponsor to benefit from it. Now let's look at how this is hidden in contracts. A mid-sized city signs a smart corridor deal where the hardware is cheap up front, but the back end requires a monthly subscription. The vendor promises they can reduce crashes using AI and adaptive traffic lights. 3 years into the deal, accidents actually nudge down in the spring, but then they spike during the summer heat because the cars never actually slowed down, only the red light timing changed. The vendor points to a colorful dashboard to prove they're doing their job, and the city points to the massive bill they're paying. Nobody actually tweaks the physical shape of the road because that would mean telling drivers to slow down, and that's a political fight nobody wants to have. Resistance also hides in the way professionals manage their own risks. Plan checkers, building inspectors, and engineers don't get fired for approving things that look familiar. They only get burned if they greenlight a new detail that isn't already in their official binder. Because of this, even the well-meaning people will steer you toward a catalog of pre-approved parts just to protect their own jobs. Trade groups reinforce this behavior with continuing education credits and best practice, sheets that make the standard path look like the only safe path. Doing something novel, even if it's objectively better, is seen as a major career hazard. And what about the courts? Whenever a city tries to chip away at parking mandates or allow for a little bit of gentle density, the lawsuits start flying immediately. State laws that were originally meant to stop urban sprawl sometimes get twisted around to block new housing in the city. Neighbors will sue under environmental rules to stop an apartment building near a train station, all while a massive highway widening project moves forward without a single peep from anyone. In these cases, delay is the same thing as a victory. Every season that passes without change is another season where the old, inefficient math stays profitable for the people at the top. You might be surprised to learn that the real antidote to all of this is just receipts and repetition. We need to measure things like induced demand and then publish the results for everyone to see. We should track code 2 levels, flicker rates, and actual crash data before and after we change a design, rather than just looking at software installed. We need to start writing performance specs into our government contracts that demand lower injuries, longer service lives, and parts that can be repaired locally. If we pair backyard cottage reform with fire-safe templates and parking reform with real street fixes, we can start to win. It isn't particularly sexy work, but it's the only way to starve the fear machine. The system is always going to fight back using stories, contracts, and old habits. You have to answer that with proof, a lot of patience, and choices that don't stop working the second the app you can actually use. All right, let's talk tactics. I'm not giving you a manifesto here, just some real moves you can make this month to cut the chaos and claw back some of your time. Start with your own 4 walls. You want to focus on repairs that actually break the cycle of constantly replacing things. If you've got those annoying crumbly drywall patches, don't just slap paint over the blisters and hope for the best. Instead, score the soft paper down to a clean edge and seal that exposed gypsum with shellac or a dedicated sealer. Then, you'll want to skim it with a setting-type compound, which is great because it hardens through a chemical reaction rather than just drying out. This means it won't re-wet and bubble up on you later. In spots that are always damp, like bathroom edges or basements, you've got to stop feeding the mold. Swap out that paper-faced board for fiberglass-faced gypsum, or even better, add a capillary break and use lime plaster in small zones. Lime is fantastic because it actually breathes and is super easy to patch. You should also add some real ventilation, like a quiet fan in the bathroom that runs constantly on a low setting and ducts outside. Make sure your range hood actually vents out instead of just recirculating the grease. In your laundry closet, slide a drain pan under the washer and toss in a leak sensor that screams at you without requiring a monthly subscription. When it comes to trim and stairs, wood beats plastic every single time because you can actually sand it down and refinish it. If you're looking at flooring, go with nail-down wood that you can screen and coat later, rather than that click-together stuff that falls apart the second one seam gets a little swollen. When it comes to your windows, pick one strategy and stick to it. Weather strip your doors and the top sash of those old windows, then add some interior storms that you can just pop out when it's time to clean. This way, you keep the heat in while holding onto a window you can actually repair. If you notice a corner staying musty, you need to find the water source, whether it's a downspout, the yard's grade, or some missing flashing, before you even think about touching a paintbrush. Spending a half hour with a garden hose for a leak test is way better than wasting 3 gallons of expensive primer on a damp wall. Now let's look at the neighborhood scale. You don't need to rewrite the entire city code to make a difference. You can just ask for small, boring changes that make life easier for everyone. Show up to your local meetings with a one-page list of easy wins, like allowing accessory units by right using a pre-approved fire-safe plan. You could also push to legalize corner stores under 1,000 square feet or ask the city to cut parking minimums near transit lines. Suggest letting people build duplexes on corner lots or allowing fourplex conversions of big old homes as long as the outside stays the same. Cities absolutely love templates, so if you hand them something they can vote on without a big fight, they're much more likely to do it. Just make sure to pair every request with a photo of a block that already works, because people tend to relax when they can see a real-world example. On your own street, you should fight those big, dangerous stroads with precision rather than a sledgehammer. Ask for daylighting at the corners, which just means pulling parking back so drivers can actually see people. Then push for raised crosswalks every couple hundred feet and trees planted in real soil. If you can get the speeds to drop, the crashes will drop right along with them. If you need some leverage, start measuring things yourself. A cheap counter and a radar gun will give you a graph that carries way more weight than just saying the cars feel fast. For local schools, push for a walk-shed plan that includes mapped safe routes and real crossings. If you can point to a specific person who is accountable for fixing missing sidewalk segments, it becomes much harder for the city to ignore you. On a personal level, it's all about stacking your errands. Try to ride your bike once and walk twice. If you can replace just one weekly car trip with a bike ride or a walk, do that first, not to be a hero, but just to get the reps in. A cargo bike or a simple trailer pays for itself faster than you'd think, especially when the daycare and the grocery store are less than 2 miles away. I also recommend keeping a last-mile kit in your trunk, like a folding scooter and a backpack, so you can park once and hit 3 different stops. If your local transit is a bit hit or miss, just use the parts that work. Take the bus into town when it's on time and just grab a rideshare home if you're running late. The goal here isn't to be a purist. It's about shaving down that $10,000 a year car habit in small chunks. Don't cancel that second car until your daily map actually supports it. But until then, you can downshift your insurance and try to schedule your life around things that are close by. Now let's talk about your office. You need to negotiate with hard numbers. Bring a Co 2 meter to work for a week and take photos of the readouts when the levels pass 1,000 parts per million. Log your headaches alongside other issues like light flicker, noise peaks, and constant pings from Slack. When you offer fixes, come prepared with price tags and clear trade-offs, like increasing the outside air or swapping out cheap lights for flicker-free version. Suggest carving out 2 quiet rooms for every 20 desks and giving stable desks to the people who actually need to do deep work. You aren't asking for a fancy office slide. You're asking for things that lead to measurable output. If your boss hesitates, propose a 90-day pilot on just one floor to track things like absenteeism and error rates. Pilots that actually save the company money are the ones that survive. A little personal gear can go a long way too. Get yourself a steady, warm task lamp and a headset that actually blocks out the noise. An underdesk air cleaner that you can control yourself and some blue light software for your screen can really help your brain stay focused. None of these things will fix a bad building on their own, but they'll buy you some much-needed mental space right now. When you're buying things, look for stuff that's repairable and avoid those annoying subscription traps. Always look for local control and products that don't require a cloud connection to function. For your doors, look for grade 1 or 2 mechanical locks with a solid strike plate and long screws that go right into the wall framing. For your thermostat, a simple programmable one with a manual override is usually better than a learning model that just sells your data. Buy air purifiers that use standard filter sizes you can find anywhere, and stick to vacuums with belts and bags you can actually replace. You should also look for printers that take third-party ink and skip anything that forces you into a club or a cartridge subscription. If you absolutely have to go with smart devices, make sure they still work when the internet goes out. When it comes to your data, you've got to opt out whenever you can. Say no to partner sharing and set up your motion zones and schedules locally. If you need security cameras, make sure they record to your own local storage rather than a stranger's cloud server. You should also turn off all those insights features, because most of the time, they're just ads in disguise. If we zoom back out, you'll see that none of this requires a massive political movement. It just takes neighbors trading notes and asking for the small legal changes that make a normal life possible. We need buyers who demand patchable walls and real ventilation from builders, and we need managers who care more about air quality than vibes. When enough people start choosing the fixable over the flashy, the whole market starts to shift, because money always follows habit. That's the quiet exit. It's not a revolution. It's just a city that finally stops charging rent on your time. The cost flip, when the trap stops paying. This is the part where the loop finally starts to stutter. The whole trap relies on you acting a certain way. It assumes you'll keep driving, keep replacing things, and keep subscribing to everything. But when enough people stop feeding the machine, the math starts to change. This doesn't happen because of some grand manifesto. It happens in a boring spreadsheet that boards and banks simply can't ignore. It all starts small. Maybe a few blocks legalize corner stores and some gentle density. At first, it's just one new cafe, a bodega, and maybe 3 houses converted into duplexes. But then something really interesting happens. The number of people needing a second car on that grid starts to drop by a few percentage points. That is real money going back into people's pockets, and that money starts showing up in the registers of nearby businesses. The city's finance team will notice steadier sales tax and better property tax per acre without having to build miles of new roads. When they look at their 5-year maintenance forecast, those quiet, dense blocks are the ones that win. Most city council members aren't urbanists, but they are definitely allergic to losing money. Eventually, the policy starts to follow the cash. Developers are going to notice what buyers are asking for too. A builder might try offering patchable walls and real ventilation as a well-being package, and even though it isn't trendy, it actually works. Those units will sell faster, the warranty calls will drop, and good word of mouth will start to build. Pretty soon, another developer is going to copy those specs because nobody wants to be the one stuck with angry reviews about mold and headaches. Lenders aren't exactly poets, but they are very good at spotting patterns. If they see that these buildings are more profitable and have lower maintenance costs, they'll stop seeing things like lime plaster as a risk. That is the cost flip, the moment when the safe bet finally shifts. Cities are also starting to rethink their parking rules. They aren't throwing out every single regulation, but they are finding the easy wins, like removing parking minimums near transit or managing curb space more effectively. Projects that used to be killed by the cost of parking spots can suddenly move forward with less concrete. Developers can stop paving over half their land just to check a box, which means you get smaller buildings that are closer together. The city gets more tax revenue per acre, and downtown areas can finally start filling in those empty gaps. Bond rating agencies love stable revenue more than they love shiny ribbon cuttings, and that moves the needle on policy more than any opinion piece ever could. Office landlords are feeling the pressure as well. Tenants are starting to show up with CO2 data and logs of sick days instead of just looking at mood boards. Leases are being renegotiated based on actual outcomes, like flicker limits and quiet room counts. If a building can't meet those standards, the rent goes down, but if it can, the tenant stays for the long haul. Churn used to be seen as a good thing. You'd freshen the place up, refinance, and repeat the cycle. Now, having a long-term tenant is worth more than having flashy lights that give people headaches. Asset managers are starting to prioritize air, light, and acoustics over things like office beer taps. Insurers might be a little slower to change, but they always catch up because claims data is very blunt. Roofs that actually last and blocks with fewer car crashes result in fewer payouts for the insurance companies. Some carriers are already offering lower premiums for fire-resistant roofs and better building materials. When a city redesigns a dangerous road into a safe street and proves that injuries have dropped, the insurance premiums for local fleets will eventually follow. Even a tiny change across a huge portfolio represents a massive amount of money. You don't need a moral crusade for this. You just need underwriters who know how to read a chart. Let me tell you a quick story. A city in the Midwest rebuilt 1 mile of a hostel strode into a real street with trees, crosswalks, and a 25-mile-per-hour design. Crashes dropped by a third, and the retail sales on that stretch actually went up by 10%. A new grocer even opened up with just 15 parking spots and a bunch of bike racks. Within 5 blocks, the average household went from having 2 cars down to 1.7. Nobody had to give a big speech about building a utopia. People just stopped wasting their time and money on forced driving. A year later, when the city budget came around, that street's maintenance costs looked so good that the council voted to do the exact same thing to the next mile. Here's another one. A regional developer started using a COMSHEL specification that included warm lighting, real outside air, and interiors that were easy to patch. Even though the construction costs were about 3% higher, their tenant retention jumped by 8%. Because people stayed longer, the turnover costs dropped, and the refinancing process was much easier because the income was so steady. For the next project, they didn't even need a sales pitch. The spreadsheet did all the talking. This is the flip. When the real world gains, like shorter trips, fewer leaks, and fewer headaches, start showing up on the balance sheets, the old story about efficiency loses its cover. The machine doesn't just die, it pivots because money always follows what actually works. You don't win this by arguing about vibes. You win by making failure too expensive to ignore. Aftermath: what changes and what doesn't? So what actually happens when the math finally flips? You start seeing some people adapt by ditching the constant churn for warranties that actually mean something, and they start selling repair kits or bragging about how their stuff rarely breaks. A few groups even start funding guides for things like wood window repairs or plaster specs so city inspectors can approve them without a massive headache. Of course, other people will just sue to buy more time because they'd rather file challenges against street redesigns or parking reform than change their business model. Delay becomes the only thing they have left to sell while they try to squeeze one last drop of profit out of the old way of doing things. In the short term, I'm not going to lie, it's a total mess. A street getting worked on feels like a giant headache, and a new grocery store that opens with only 15 parking spots is going to start some legendary Facebook wars. You'll see landlords who patch up original plaster instead of doing a cheap vinyl flip, getting weird looks from brokers who just want shiny photos for the listing. Even offices that trade in those hoteling desks for stable workspaces might look a little less cool in a corporate slide deck. But under all that noise, something much steadier starts to grow, and suddenly you're dealing with fewer emergency calls or blown weekends spent on repairs. Let's be honest, the stress of life doesn't just vanish into thin air because heat waves still hit, and your boss is definitely still going to schedule a 5 o'clock meeting. Even so, that baseline level of anxiety starts to drop because your rooms feel calm without needing a fancy app to manage them. Commutes get way shorter when you can grab a gallon of milk within a 10-minute walk instead of trekking across a massive parking lagoon. Your house finally stops buzzing at you to buy a new filter every 90 days, and later becomes a real thing again because your stuff actually lasts long enough to plan around. You can really feel the culture shift in these tiny ways, like when the neighborhood pride moves from owning something new to owning something kept. I mean, seriously, a neighbor can post a video of themselves fixing a window sash and get way more likes than someone showing off a basic quartz counter reveal. Kids start riding down to the corner store for eggs, and they come back with a fun story instead of getting a scolding for being outside. Even the block WhatsApp thread starts swapping names of good plumbers and plasterers, instead of just sharing promo codes for junk you don't need. The whole city starts to feel smaller and your day feels longer, but it's not because the clock actually changed. It's because the gaps between your errands shrank, and now 3 different chores fold into one quick walk. The default plan for dinner becomes, let's just go somewhere nearby, and you don't even have to check a spreadsheet to justify the cost. Your shoulders finally relax, and the weirdest part is that money actually gets boring because you stop having those massive surprise expenses every month. You end up putting off big purchases because the old thing still works perfectly, and that feels like a tiny rebellion that nobody can send you a bill for. Now, some things are never going to change because the people who make money on complexity will keep trying to sell it to you. You'll see a new round of smart dashboards that promise to optimize the air, even though trees and shade already do that for free. Fear is always going to get plenty of airtime on the news, and a few government agencies will cling to old manuals that mistake high speeds for actual safety. Let's face it, a huge chunk of the market is still going to love cheap house flips and dangerous roads, because habit is a very strong drug. But the map looks different now that you've seen blocks that actually work for the people living on them. You've met people who measured their air quality, patched up their own walls, and got hours of their life back by walking instead of driving. The old maze is still standing there, but it's definitely not the only path you can take anymore. The choice is yours, so which way is your block going to go, and what tiny fix are you going to support next? The trap only works if we all keep walking through the maze, but the second you step off the path, the numbers start to move in your favor. If you want more of these lies decoded and more maps to help you escape the churn, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with that one friend who thinks burning out is just a normal part of life, and drop a comment telling me about the smallest trap you managed to cut out of your life this year. Because apparently, that's exactly how real change